what we're dealing with in terms of revelational ethics versus personal ethics, what we're dealing with is, in the most basic understanding, is the question of where does ethics come from? And do ethics come from within the person, okay, or does ethics come from without? That was a constant challenge in the philosophical perceptions of reason versus revelation. Okay, that was a classic philosophical issue where there were arguments that for the benefits of reason as the source of ethics versus revelation as the source of ethics. That was a whole philosophical issue. Within the realm of Torah, obviously, we believe in revelation as the source of ethics. That's basically it, in the sense that, and what we mean here is not just that ethics come from a Kadosh Baruch Hu, because even if you're a religious reason person, you just believe that God put those ethical sensitivities within the person. It's a matter that we believe that God presented ethics outside of ourselves, i.e. Torah, to tell us what to do or what's the right thing to do. The point is that we're now working with it. That's clear cut. That's very clear cut. That's what Sinai is about, right? Don't kill. Okay, it seems like ethics is outside of me. But the question is that what happens with the feelings we have within ourselves of ethics? Okay, what about these feelings that people do have of what is ethical from their own perspective? And on the most, let's say, simplistic understanding, it's almost like we don't care about those feelings. The Torah says it's mutter, it should be mutter. The Torah says it's asr, it's asr. We don't care what you feel. Okay, it gets in the way. Actually, it can very powerfully even be argued that it gets in the way. Okay, so the issue arises. Let's say with Avraham, it's like Avraham Avinu was told to sacrifice Yitzchak. There is perceptions that he did it ba'ava. That's the mitzvah, right? He didn't consider it his own ethical. How could he do it? So it's like that's straightforward. And he did it ba'ava. It was okay and so forth. There is a Sephardic piyut that talks about how Abraham went to the Akedah and his heart was breaking inside. So there is a perspective of a conflict within him. Like on one side he was crying and doing this, but that's not necessarily ethical. It's just being emotional in terms of relating or whatever. Okay, but the point is that in the most simplistic understanding of it, it's like ethics are totally outside of ourselves, and Kadosh Baruch Hu tells us what's ethical. So there is actually movement within certain perspectives to try and limit our own ethical perspectives. Okay. What I'm trying to do is basically show you that starting with revelational ethics, that Kadosh Baruch Hu tells you what to do, and that's the basis of our ethics. What I'm going to try to do is I'm trying to show you that from basic statements in Torah and directions in Torah, it's making certain assumptions about the person. In other words, the way I put it across, and I've said this many times before, is that when God spoke at Sinai, most people want to perceive it as God speaking to a blank page. Like, blank page, God just started writing. It wasn't a blank page. We had people who had certain perspectives, certain ideas. They were Klal Yisrael. They were the children of Rabbi and Yaakov. They had a certain perspective from being in Mitzrayim. That's why throughout the Torah, don't forget you were slaves. So the point is if I tell you don't forget your slaves, I'm saying, okay, yeah, I remember, I was a slave. Thank you very much. Yeah, it was May 14th. Such and such a date. That's when I said my first word. No, it's obvious telling you that something happened inside you. I'm talking to a person with some type of perspective. It's not just simply a blank page. But what I'm trying to do is I'm basically trying to go through this in terms of showing you right at the beginning that the Torah is speaking to an individual that has a certain type of inner perspective. And from that inner perspective Revelational ethics, when I'm talking about the statements of ethics from outside the person, has to relate to something inside the person. So the first thing we talked about is the very nature of halacha. Okay? Halacha was not given as a basic do and don't. Do this, don't do this, like this. It was very complex. It's not do's and don'ts. It's a whole system. And it's further complex by the fact that we have all these disagreements in halacha. Massive disagreements, on major ethical issues. Even in the world of, even in the ethical issues that exist in the general world. The Jewish view on abortion, there's different viewpoints. For example, obviously it's not the same as pro-choice. Obviously we don't accept total autonomy on that. But in terms of questions of abortion, what happens if a woman is raped? Right? Do you have abortion or not in that situation? Okay, that's a question of different opinions from different people. Okay, so the fact is that they're different. If a person is a woman, another classic question is a woman who's diabetic. Okay, and there's issues that if she goes full term, it might cause blindness. That's not a matter of her health being her life being at risk, but her health being at risk. Now there are shittas that hold that blindness is kameis, is like death. So therefore, if the person's going to go blind, that's like it's mamish sakanas nefashos, it's life threatening. But the fact is that is a mother's life enough, a mother's health enough to cause an abortion? There's a whole variety of issues. On classic what we call ethical issues, euthanasia. Of course, active euthanasia is completely also, but the fact is passive euthanasia. Attitudes towards passive euthanasia. You see it in terms of the thinking of poskim, where you have a situation come to poskim, and certain perspectives of poskim like we want to find the heter. We like what's told. As for example, if a person is on a machine that's keeping him alive, and medically it calls for the machine to somehow, the tube that's connected to the person, to be cleaned. Okay, that's natural progress. This is normal thing you have to do. At some point in time, they have to take the machine off the person in order to do something to the machine, clean it, so on and so forth. Okay, so the Rabbi would say, at that moment, once you take them off the machine, it's no chiyuv to put them back on, right? Because there's actually an attitude of saying yes, and the person's in tremendous pain. There's a concept of euthanasia. It's passive, but we understand this perspective of quality of life and a person in pain, trying to extend just quantitative life in pain may not be of value, on a certain level. Other people say absolutely not. Right? You have to again put them on because the quantitative life. So there's a lot of issues that exist. But the point I'm trying to say is these are all halachic issues. So the fact is, it tells you the very nature of the way God said the do's and don'ts demands something from the person. That first level, it's not the internal ethics. It's a mistake. Some people think that it's internal ethic, and then you try to read it into the halacha, that there's some certain people that they favor euthanasia, and then they try and find an attitude in the halacha this way, and there's other people who favor a more quantitative value in life. They'll read it into halacha. That's not what I'm saying here. Okay, what I'm saying is that it's the fact that the Torah has that type of analysis tells you that the person is involved. Okay, now how is the person involved? Well, it's going to be an interesting question. In terms of the fact is once you bring in a system that demands analysis, then the analyzer becomes a factor in that analysis. Okay? In other words, and I'll just give you an example. What I mean by that, in other terms of any thinking, anytime you have people thinking, we call it something like shikul hadas, which is the weighing of thought. Unless you absolutely prove A or B. In halacha, if you actually prove something to be illogical, that's a tiyufta, therefore that's totally dismissed. but you end up with 4 or 5 logical possibilities. So which one do you choose, and so forth. So that's a whole big issue. But the individual, once you say it's a thinking system, the individual is involved. So, like for example, just intellectually, for example, you find cases of stira, of a disagreement in halachic theory, or halachic facts. You have 2 facts that seem to contradict each other, or two statements that seem to be seemingly in contradiction to each other. And you have to rectify it. You have to reconcile them. How do you go about reconciling them? So usually what happens is you take one to be the ikar and the other one to be the tefel. What that means is you take one to be the fundamental one and the other one to be the sort of explanatory one. Okay, and if you take one to be, that's really what it's all about, and the other one, I'll explain away. Okay? Now, how do you choose? Which one is this one? Which one is that one? Well, you may say, well, it comes from your whole educational system. Well, how did you start learning? The first thing you learned, right? Whether you learned, this pasuk, that pasuk, you learned this Gemara, you learned that Gemara. That can affect your whole methods of learning, because the first thing you learned, you may give more weight to. So the point is that we are subject, as temporal beings, we are subject to our temporal existence in terms of the educational system. So there is but there might be other factors lead to as well, but this is a classic issue. Like, for example, Moshe Weinberg wrote an article on women in the study of Torah. In the article, he wants to develop the idea that the 2 main statements about women in the study of Torah are 2 Gemaras. One Gemara is a statement that says anyone who teaches women Torah is kilulam to tiflis, right? It's like you teach them tiflis, and the question is, tiflis is either what tiflis is. Is it foolishness? Is it the ability? Is sort of a little bit of licentiousness or whatever? It's this whole issue of what tiflis means. That's one source. Okay, that's the source that sort of says, you shouldn't teach women Torah. There's another source that says, B'mei Chizkiyahu, the time of Chizkiyahu HaMelech. Okay, there was so much knowledge throughout Yehuda, throughout the country, that even the boys and girls, 6-year-old boys and girls, knew how to answer questions of Tumah and Tara. Okay, they knew how to figure out whether something's Tameh or Tahar. You need a tremendous amount. Anyone who's studied Tumah and Tara, it's not simple. You have to know a little detail here and here. It says, and specifically says, the boys and girls. You don't pick that up from just looking at a code. You have to know how to deal with things. So it obviously tells you that there was intensive education even for young girls. Okay, so that's considered. So Rabbi Weinberg tries to point out. Rabbi Weinberger tries to point out that there's a contradiction between the 2 sources. Then he goes about saying that he presents the 2 opinions of the Sir Rabbi Yoshe Soloveitchik on one side and the Satmar Rav on the other side. Okay, and Real Totobaum, right? And Satmar has a very limited view of women's education, right? From what I've heard in Satmar girls' schools, girls don't even learn Rashi. They learn Torah Shebechtav, they Torah Shebal Peh, they don't learn because Rashi is Torah Shebal Peh. He quotes Midrashim. So they don't even do Rashi. That's an interesting perspective. I heard someone else tell me that that's one of the reasons they don't want to teach Gemara. They don't want to teach Hebrew to girls because that way they'll be able to learn Rashi. Therefore, they want to Yiddish. I mean, that might be extreme. These are certain things I've heard, but there's a very...
Isn't Rashi available in Yiddish?
I don't know.
There must be something out there.
There must be something out there. Gee, yeah, you know how it is. There's always those reactionaries and going about translating Rashi into Yiddish, to destroy the whole system, right? Okay. Anyways, but the point is, I'm trying to say, there's a very limited understanding of women's education, and Rabbi Yoshe says women should learn Gemara. Okay, in Maimonides, his high school, there was no separation between the boys and girls in terms of education, and that was on principle. Women have to know, Bisman is that, have to know how to learn just as well as a man. That was Yoshe Bear's position. Okay, Okay.
Did he hold that that was because of current environment, or that was always true?
He, from what I understand, the truth is his position. All we know is what he did. He never explained it. In fact, he when Stern College opened up its first women's-based medrash and started the whole Gemara class, the whole Gemara system, he gave the first year. The opening basement, he gave the first year. And Rabbi Joel Walowski says, the minute the Rav gave the first year, that was the end of the discussion for modern Orthodoxy. That was it. The Rav didn't say, what did he say? Came, he gave a shir. Okay, and that was it. Okay, but he never explained his thinking. Mrs. Grissman, right, Rabbi Grissman's wife, right, was at that shir. And from what I understand is that he never explained why, and some person asked at the end, said, "You're teaching women Gemara, like the Rav, please explain the thinking." I mean, not b'chutzpah, but I want to know the thinking. And supposedly the Rav said, there may be some people who have problems with this. Just give them my phone number and tell them to give me a call. I'll explain it to them, and that was it. So he never really explained it. But what I've recently read this, is that his argument was that Bizman Hazeh, women especially have to know halacha. And halacha is a product of halachic reasoning. In other words, to live in our world today, you have to know how to be a halachic Jew. And you can't know how to be a halachic Jew by reading codes, because halacha is a system. Therefore, he felt it was very important for women to know the process of halacha, okay, and know how to deal with situations and issues. You know, something happens in the kitchen. I mean, I'm not saying women's kitchen, but you're cooking. This is mutter, not mutter. It's okay. All the basic fundamental theories of how to live a halachic life. Anyways, the point is that it is intellectual. Anyway, so Rabbi Weinberger wants to argue that between these two major sources in the Gemara, okay, that the Satmarav took the statement in Sota about Kilulam de Tiflis, like the teaching in Tiflis, as the Iker. And then he tried to explain how in Hiskell the girls also knew Tuman Torah so well, and so forth and so forth. Says the Rav takes the statement about Hiskell as the Iker. This is the ideal. And he tries to explain what the Tiflis statement is about. That's methods of analysis. That's what happens when you have to do to work out anything.
Excuse me, but in all the times that they mentioned that a woman should not learn, did they ever give the reason, the negativity that would come out of it for a woman to learn? Did anybody ever explain it? Why they don't want a woman to learn?
The argument is, okay, I'll give you my perception on the topic. And this is from actually going through different enforcement to the Asians and so forth. My own understanding is that it's a woman. It says anyone who teaches their daughter Torah is Kilulam B'Tiflis. There's no distinction made between Torah Shebechtav and Torah Shebal Peh in the Mishnah and Sota. It's only later on the Rambam makes that distinction. The question is, what is Tiflis? Okay, Tiflis seems to be, it can be foolish, whatever, but what Tiflis seems to be is the ability to try and play with the law to get a heter. In other words, the Gemara Sota is talking about specifically a situation where a woman is a Sota, that's a woman who's a wayward wife, and she knows that if she has chuyos, she has some merits, that the water won't act immediately on her. So sit there and say, okay, I can get away with this because I have chuyos and stuff like that. In other words, she'll start playing games. And one of the great things that exists in Jewish law is that there is always a fear for people to use the law, like to play with it. Like
knowledge is dangerous.
Yes, a little bit of knowledge is dangerous. The issue over there, from what I saw someone explains, it says, Kol melamed bito Torah, kol melamed tiflos. It doesn't say a woman who learns, Torah is like that. It's if you teach your daughter Torah like this, that's like learning tiflos. Because the fact is that there's a distinction in terms of teaching men and teaching women. There's a chiyuv on men to learn Torah. There's no chiyuv on women to learn Torah. So the point is with men there's a constant analysis. If you're not learning, it may be bittul Torah. So there's a tremendous pressure on men that they have to be continuously learning. On women, because there's no perception, it's actually an issue of bittul Torah. It's a problem with it. Therefore, they can learn in a less intense fashion. Now, what does that mean? If you try to instruct a girl and try to impose upon them the learning the same way as you do with a boy, because the boy has a chiyuv, has an obligation to learn, and you basically obligate him to learn because he has an obligation. That's one thing. But with a girl, it's like she's not as obligated. So she really doesn't have that obligation. So if you try to obligate her and give this impression to her that she has to continue learning, at some point in time, she won't be continuing learning. So what you can do is give her a little bit of information. In other words, what you're doing is you're pushing on a little bit of information that can allow her, that eventually she'll get to a point where she'll have some information, but she won't have what I would say is sufficient information to make decisions. And that's the problematic situation. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that imposing study upon a person who does not feel total obligation to get the whole system and understand the whole system, you're giving them a little bit of knowledge, and that could be dangerous. Okay, it's someone who, with men, you also have that problem that they could be a little bit of knowledge. The truth is that I think men can have the same problem. There's a lot of guys that learn a little bit and they think they know what they're talking about. The problem is with men, they have an obligation to learn. So I don't have the same leeway with men to say, hey, you guys, I'm not going to teach you because you only learn a little bit, and you won't be enough to really understand the system. Let me rephrase what I'm saying is that because, in other words, there's a certain amount of knowledge which is needed to be a decision maker. Okay? The problem is that to get to this type of knowledge, you first have to go through stages, right? You have until you finally get to the point of being a person who has enough knowledge to make decisions. Along the way, you are giving knowledge to people with insufficient breadth of knowledge or depth of knowledge, and a little knowledge in the hands of those people can be dangerous. So what you want is basically you really want to teach people who are really committed to trying to get the whole system down, which means they have to be self-motivated and wanting to learn. They have to be committed to do this. With men, there's an obligation though to learn Torah. Therefore, with men, I have an obligation to teach them, which means that I'm going to be giving over to some men who aren't really going to take the learning seriously, but I have to try and bring them to the level of being able to make their own decisions. The way I understand with women is that if they're personally motivated, then that's fine. But to teach them and impose upon them that you have to learn, when they're not motivated, and they may not get to the point of being complete scholars or able to make decisions, they're going to be at a point where they're going to have a little bit of knowledge that looks like they know what they're talking about, when really they don't know what they're talking about. So it's a concern, because it's a concern for people making decisions with insufficient information. Because women are not obligated to learn, we can be more restrictive and make sure, hey, I'm not going to teach any person unless I know that there's a good chance they'll get to the point of being competent scholars. or competent in the system. With men, I don't have the same type of leeway, because men, there's an obligation for them to learn. Okay, so therefore that's the way I understand the development of it. So that's my own perspective on it. And there's different commentaries I think I got it from and so forth. But the point is that there, as far as I see it, there's clearly a value as a halakhic Jew to know how to learn. I mean, to know how to make halakhic decisions. The point is that
more important than to learn is to ask, to know to ask. And you don't know.
The fact that to really know how to ask, you already have to know. Unless you ask everything, but the fact is you have to know what the issues are.
It's better yet to ask than
for sure it's better.
Blind and pretend you know what you're doing or not.
Therefore, if that's true, the best way to be is either the person doesn't know anything, that he knows how to ask everything. But a person has a little bit of knowledge. I already know the answer. I went to class. I did all about it. I never heard anyone say that bacon wasn't kosher. I went to Hebrew school. No one told me if shrimp wasn't kosher. It's obviously kosher, right? Right? That's what I mean. The guy who I never learned anything is good, but once you learn a little bit, unless you say, listen, I shouldn't really voice an opinion unless I really get the whole picture. Okay? Yeah.
In all the discussion, the one thing I still don't understand, and I understand that it's off topic, so if you want to just say move on, I respect that. But why your Shofar would say now it's important? It wasn't in 1850 important for a woman to know what's going on in the kitchen? Or was there a status?
Okay. I think what happened was it's the same argument, the Chafetz Chaim's argument about Beis Yaakov schools. People recognize that the teaching in Beis Yaakov schools was also radical, right? Where we take it as what women learn standard from the regular schools, okay, except maybe Satmar, but the first regular schools was radical. It was a radical invention from the Chafetz Chaim. The way I understand it is that women were always scholars, or always women scholars. There's an interesting book out by Dr. Shoshana Zolty called All My Children Shall Be Learned, and she talks about women scholars. Everyone knows Rashi and Rashi's daughters and so forth, but like the Maharal Prague's wife edited his works, okay?
Like a lot of rabbis' wives.
Yeah, and she said she had to say yes. Something in my work said, my husband did make a few mistakes. He got about 10 sources wrong, but you have to understand he was wrong in time in the writing, so he wrote down a couple sources incorrectly. She caught it. The fact is like, okay, so this is, I look through it, yeah, you got this Gemara wrong. It's like,
you made the same thing wrong.
Right, okay, so that's Maharal Prague's wife. Okay, so the fact is, Eishes Chaver Kachaver. The fact is that the wife of a scholar is like a scholar. The point is that women always learned.
And the prophets, the female prophets.
There were female prophets as well. And the fact is, you can't be a prophet unless you're wise. So all the female prophets had to be wise. The fact is that the times change, and let me try to explain what I mean by that. I don't want to sound conservative, though. What happened is that we have a reality that women did learn throughout the ages, or always specific women learned. Therefore, we understand that the blanket statement, women shouldn't learn, was not a blanket statement. Okay, that all women, just because they're female, shouldn't be learned. It was an aspect where I think was saying that given that women weren't involved in intellectual pursuits, right? In that we don't want to impose the same idea on the people who really aren't involved in study. A remarkable call to study, because a little bit of knowledge could be dangerous. However, what happened was in the 1800s already, women were going to the gymnasium. Women were studying secular subjects, and they were basically ignorant of Judaism, and they knew secular studies, and they were using their minds. So the Chavetz Chaim recognizes that B'zman hazeh, obviously women have to learn. Because we're talking about a shift in the nature of women. It's not the halacha changes; it's the halacha responds to the facts as they are. Okay, and we don't want to recognize. We're not talking about the intellectual pursuits. I'm sure women may have had a high basic IQ. The same spread of IQ for women existed in 2,000 years ago as they exist now. But the fact is women weren't instructed to use their minds to the same extent. They weren't instructed in the intellectual activities. Yeah, there were a few. There were some female philosophers, and there were this and that. You see, there were, but the fact is that, but it shifted in the 1800s, especially B'zman hazeh, okay, where women are more open are more trained intellectually. They're studying stuff in secular studies, and they become physicists and judges and doctors and so forth and so forth. So obviously they're more involved in saying, hey, I want to know what's going on over here. I want to know the mechanics of understanding what's going on in Torah. Okay, so I can make real decisions. Okay, that's part of the movement that's happening. It's a very different social milieu. So I think there was that perspective there. But the fundamental thing, you see, the reason it's important to state it this way is that it's not a change in the halacha. It's very important to stress that. Okay? Any person, the Rav Yoshe Ber will say, this woman should learn Gemara, he would have said it 2,000 years ago. He would have said that the Rambam would have said it. He would have said that the Chazal would have said it. No questions about it. The point is that women like that were the exceptions back then. Nowadays, most women are like that, or a good number of women like that. The only thing you have is that the thing is, well, were most men like that? Were most men also not really able to be scholarly back then also? Yes, but you have to deal with the chiyuv of limun Torah. Men have the chiyuv of limun Torah. Therefore, you have to take a risk to teach the men, even though they could foolishly misapply the halacha. Okay, but the fact is that's my understanding of it. But when I brought this up as an example, but I brought up an example of thinking, and the fact that we're calling the individual right in the halachic system right off the bat to make decisions. Okay, it's therefore you are involved. So that's not personal ethics, but the person is involved. Okay, and even if you want to say that's not the emotions and that's not subject, that's not the personality, the fact is that we are affected by our educational systems. Okay, in other words, when we talk about shikul hadas, which is the way that people weigh between two logical possibilities, okay, it's called the weighing of the dot between logical possibilities. There may be a role for your own whatever inherent personality, whatever it is. Some people say no. What happens is that you get a feeling from your bottom line first educational experience. You get your feeling of Judaism building up from the beginning, how you started it, right? If you're told off the bat, let's say when you're 3 years old, right? The greatest thing about being Jewish is the fact that we have our own country, and it's so important to have a country, and so on and so forth. And this is not meant to be taking a position on this, but a person is brought up about the importance of having a country, right? Then when the person's 25 years old, he's already, that's his education comes from that perspective, right? If you're brought up in the perspective that the country is the creation of this country was Mises Sutton, among the son was from the other side, then you are affected in how you think. We don't want to recognize of how much we pick up along the way and how we build our Judaism. right, from certain things in terms of methodology. Anyway, so that's the first step. So that's the first step. Now, the next step I want to deal with is the Ramban, because the Ramban makes an important statement that tells you that, okay, now there's the next step. So here you have the halacha, and the halacha is not given as clear-cut do's and don'ts, but a lot of information, and saying you got to be involved. Now here comes the next step, but it's still an intellectual step. The Ramban basically presents this idea in two different places. One is this famous statement about Kedoshim Tiyu, right? That there's a mitzvah of Kedoshim Tiyu, you should be Kodesh, and he says, Kodesh atzmacha b'mutalach. You have to sanctify yourself, using the word Kodesh to mean holy or sanctity in what is allowed to you. What he's basically saying is, and this is a concept of Lev Mashur Sadin, is going beyond the law, is that there's a concept of, from the factors that are involved in the law, determining an overall moral lesson beyond the details of the law that is supposed to direct you in other situations. Okay, that really seem to be allowed within the law, but it tells you to go beyond the law. In other words, it's telling you to develop an ethic that is beyond the law. So he says that in another place where he says is Sita Yashar V'Tov. The statement of Kedoshim Tiyu is by Yikra 19:12, 19:2, and the statement of Sita Yashar Sar is from Devarim 6:18. Vasita Yashar V'Tov. Now we're going to come back to that statement very significantly in terms of Yashar and Tov, what's straight and what's good. But he says you should do what's Yashar and Tov, and what does he say there? He says that it's impossible for the Torah to tell you exactly what to do in every situation. Can't do that. There's a million situations out there in life. So the Torah tells you what to do in a bunch of situations, and then tells you to develop this idea of Tov and Yashar, and then apply these principles in new situations. Okay, in situations, the classical example of that is a concept that is a halachic concept that a neighbor has first dibs on a property. If you have a bunch of fields out there or something like that, and you want to sell your property, you go to your neighbor and you have to say, listen, selling the property. Now the neighbor's got to come over to fair market value and so forth and so forth. I'm giving you first rights. Okay, why? Because property's right beside yours, and obviously it's more beneficial to you if you want to buy property to buy the one beside it, and so forth and so forth. Okay, the bar mitzvah. Anyways, the point is that's a concept where Chazal basically said Vasita Yashav Tov. We've taken from the various rules of understanding what it means to be a mensch, we now have taken a principle and extended it to a new situation. Now, in saying that, that's a different. It's still using the mind. It's bringing your mind into it, and it's saying that, hey, I have to apply it in a new situation. Okay. Now, in doing so, we are also being told that there are large principles that we are supposed to consider beyond the details. See, if you want to work with a very tight perception of a master-slave relationship, the master tells the slave what to do, and don't think, don't ever think, right? Which means if I tell you to move the pencil 6 inches, doesn't mean you should move it 7 inches. That's an extreme position of what you want in a robot. That's an extreme position of what you want in a slave mentality, right? Do not think. If you think, you're going to make mistakes. So I really want you not to think. And there's a lot of stories. There's all these stories about, a guy is told by a king, go do something, and the guy starts thinking on his own, comes up with a way of doing it, comes back to his king and said, I know you told me not to do this, but I worked it out to the situation that this is what I should do, and it turns out that because of that, he messed it up for the king. Okay, there's a lot of stories like that. So you see, you should never think. The fact of the matter is that we are told by God to think. First of all, make halachic decisions. So what I tell you to do is not so clear cut, but now I'm also telling you, from what I told you to do, extend it to new situations. Take out these ideas, and you have to come up with these concepts called Yasher and Tov. Apply it in a new situation. Now, you have a bunch of these details, so what exactly is Yasher and Tov? What exactly is Kedoshim to you? Maybe it means this, maybe it means that. So we have concepts of these aspects of L'fnim Meshur Sidin, going beyond the law, because there is a perception that we want to gain, we want to have. We see we have to develop, into extending these values into other situations. Okay, so for example, like people say, there's an argument in terms of secular studies, right? That if you read Rabbi Lamb's book on Torah Umada, one of his theories of values of secular studies is that Chachma, science comes from God as well. So in Torah, you're trying to get close to God through understanding, through understanding Torah and so forth and so forth. So he throws at the concept that there should be also a value in studying science, because that will give you the greater appreciation for the wisdom of God in science. Now that's the Rambam says. He says the way you develop Zavas Hashem is by studying the astronomy and getting these things. So the fact is that perspective says, hey, from any type of thoughtful analysis, you can develop a value and so forth and so forth. So the point is that we have the details of given to us, but then God tells us, according to Rambam's perspective, hey, what I want you to do is take those details and develop ethical constructs for new situations out there. And that involves you having to figure it out. Right? If you're going to study Kedoshim Tiyah, what does Kedoshim Tiyah mean? I have to know what Kodesh means. And Kodesh may mean different things to different people. Right? It may involve different types of perspectives. There's an interesting example, yeah.
So like you said, what's the difference between this and the conservatives? As you were saying before, I don't want to fall into them.
No, I don't want to sound like conservative.
Okay. That's a good question. The fact is that the early conservatives, there's a difference between the conservatives today and the early conservatives. Okay, if you read about the early conservatives, like the person who founded the Breslau Seminary in Europe, right? There are statements by Gedolim that talked about him, about them being really big Tamir Chamim, and the founder of the Breslau Seminary. They have a picture of him with payas. Okay, I mean, you're talking about it. What occurred is really a very powerful issue. To understand how to do this analysis demands a tremendous amount of consideration, figuring out what is it. Like, to understand that Rabbi Yosheber's argument about women studying Torah fits within the halachic system. But then a person might come around and just say, well, he just changed the law. The movement, what was occurring is that there were always chedushim within Jewish thought. Once you had people not buying Torah Misinai, they were starting to move away and developing arguments that a subtle person could really pick up about the distinction. If you really understood that was outside the pale. Like, there's a lot of times, like I've done this before, where I brought in, let's say, a responsive from a conservative rabbi, and I give it to people and say, read this, and they discuss it, the issue about analysis and so forth, and said, do you understand why that's a conservative response? Because I point out that there was a fundamental issue that no one in the Orthodox world would have accepted as as a construct in making that analysis. It was just a little bit. It's just very subtly a little bit outside, which looks like it fit right in terms of all the arguments, but it's just a little bit outside the pale. Okay? Now, the point is that people started saying, well, if you can change this, why can't you change this? Why can't you change this? And therefore, there was movements that were just a little bit outside the pale. And that's somewhat of the problem. It began as very subtle distinctions. I'm trying to think of a good example.
Choirs.
Pardon?
Choirs. I mean, you have Orthodox choirs,
Yeah.
and then you have your conservative choirs.
Yeah. And what's the problem with conservative choirs?
I'm not sure, but you don't really find choirs in Orthodox shuls.
Right, but that's a good example in terms of. But in the Breuer's model, they have choirs and so forth. See, what it sometimes comes down to is a distinction in the Hechter, where I would find a leniency in a very specific situation for a very specific case, and say, okay, it's what's in that case, but it's very, very tied to the specific situation. You might find, this person basically arguing that it's totally mutter, without seeing as defined to that situation. But I'm trying to think of a more exact argument. See, I'll give you an example. The question of a Kohen marrying a Gerusha, okay, Kohen marrying a divorcee, where the conservatives allowed a Kohen to marry a divorcee. Right. That was one of the early things that they did. They allowed Kohen to marry divorcees, so forth and so forth, okay. Now, the truth is that it's my first pasuk. I mean, you just play with Torah Shabbat Peh. I mean, that doesn't work. You know what I mean? I mean, sorry, with Torah Shabbat that doesn't work. There's an issue with any Kohen today. Is he really a Kohen? How do you really know that someone's a Kohen today? Okay, so we rely upon a chazaka. A person says he's a Kohen. He's a Kohen. But there's no yurshin that says, there's no documentation that proves a Kohen. I mean, there might be a few people out there who are really
Kohen gene today.
Yeah, well, that doesn't count either. But there might be a Kohen Amiti, because it's not just a Kohen, it's some pygmy tribe in Africa as well. So maybe the fact is, I'm sorry, but the fact is that if you have it's a person who'll call him a Kohen Amiti, comes in, here's the documentation. And right back to Aaron HaKohen, there it is, right there. I know my yichus perfectly. Okay, no question. He's a Kohen. For most people, how do you know they're a Kohen? I don't know. So that creates an issue. It's actually an issue in halacha about Kohens and are they real Kohen and so forth and things like that. What happens is we have a concept of Kohanim having chazaka, cheskes kahuna, and we're willing to rely upon the cheskes kahuna for, in other words, that will apply the cheskes kahuna to say who you're also to. Well, a person can't marry a divorcee, and we'll also apply the cheskes kahuna to allow a person to go up there and make the bracha for birkas kohanim. Okay, so we're relying upon lahalacha, even though we know there's some issues on it and so forth and so forth. Comes around a situation where this guy, he's not even a practicing Kohen, he may be, someone, all these other things, comes in and says, I want to marry this woman, I'm in love with her, I want to marry her, and so forth and so forth. So the conservative movement basically said, we don't know 10% that they're Kohanim. They have a chazaka, the chazaka, there's issues over. So they basically challenge that nowadays we don't have to absolutely say that our Kohanim are really Kohanim. And if they got other reasons, this and that, we can go ahead and do this. And you basically say, you make it like a blanket statement Therefore, you can make a statement that we can marry Kohanim with divorcees. We don't really know if they're Kohanim, and so forth. What's the problem? Well, the problem is that throughout the workings of the halachic world, we came up with a cheskes kahuna. We worked out to maintain some reality of kahuna in the Jewish world. Now, are there situations where it comes out that someone's a Kohen, and do we work out basically certain issues where we'll challenge someone's kahuna? Yes. On a case-by-case basis, there are cases where, because of certain circumstances, we'll look back into it and say, you know something, the chazaka is not as good as a real chazaka, and so forth and so forth. We don't have to declare you specifically a Kohen, but it's not a blanket statement that says all the Kohanim today don't count. They're not really Kohanim. But the conservative movement, they did have some basis of what they were saying. There was some weaknesses in the absolute argument that everyone's a Kohen. But halacha accepted that as a standard. So just to turn around and say, well, there's weaknesses, we're just going to push it aside, it's too broad. It was too broad a statement. It was to just, so that's the kind of thing that happens. What happens is that, now, the truth is that this, where it gets further than that, is most people who have that happen is because they already don't believe in aspects of Torah Sinai, or they believe the halacha has some binding nature on the Jewish people, but they really don't buy the absolute definitions of the impact of Torah, or the legitimacy of Torah from an Orthodox perspective. So that's already the weaknesses. It's very much so the person who buys the historical arguments is going to be much more lenient in saying, hey, we can go with the times or whatever it is. But nowadays it's like a joke. Like even within the conservative movement, this last thing they did on homosexuality. So there's a guy who basically said, okay, I think Joel Roth basically said, okay, let's stop kidding ourselves. We're no longer a halachic entity, even according to our definition of halacha. We're playing games anymore. We're not in any way trying to keep a system of halacha. But the point is originally it was subtle distinctions that led to arguments between people, but you really needed that recognition of validity to the system as it was, and allowing for and that usually came from the fact that it was very much tied to acceptance of things such as Torah Sinai and the much more legitimacy to the halachic system, or validity of the halachic system, versus more laxity because they brought in this idea of historical perspective. Did I answer the question? Okay, it's much more in-depth idea, but we're off topic here. Okay, but that's okay, right? Okay. Anyways, people, they can tune in next week because we're going to keep going until we hit this one. But the fact is, anyways, what I'm trying to say is that this next statement of what's happening here is that we are told by God to now develop principles. Okay. Not just to work out things. And by the way, the famous story of Tanur Shalachnai, the famous Gemara in Bava Metzia really comes to the point of here, that God said, and this is a halachic issue. He said, when Rabbi Yeshua says "Lav b'shamayim," he's saying, listen, God can't tell us what to do anymore, because God's original edict was to say, now you guys figure it out. So I'm going to stand up. Now you have to figure it out. That's the halacha. Okay. Now with the Ramban story on top of that, it's not just trying to figure out what the statements are within the system. You have to take the details and create principles, moral principles, yasher, tov, kodesh. And as you develop these principles in thought, you're going to have disagreements. You're going to have different viewpoints. What that means, what that means, whatever, right? Because it's a matter of investigation. And here it's already getting into a moral perspective, intellectual moral perspective. What does yasher mean? What does it mean to be straight? What does it mean to be good? Right? What does it mean to work? Now I'm already working on some aspect of moral principles, which I then have to use to apply in other situations. So I'm being told to come up with ideas that I now have to apply in a different situation. That involves me getting involved. Now, in addition to that, what happens is that something like Yasher and Tov, it already touches something inside of me that I already have a perspective on, right? In other words, if you're trying to tell me, well, this idea of doing what's just, well, that term for justice, I have to figure it out from the principles, the different halachic principles, but I also have something inside me that may have a perspective of just that's going to affect me in analyzing the various details. So therefore, my own perspective is getting involved, and that's actually going to come up very more, because we're going to see that people say by Yasher Tov b'nei Shemayim, Tov is in the eyes of heaven, by Yasher b'nei Adam. What is Yasher? What is straight in the eyes of man? Okay, that already tells me, well, in the eyes of man, that means that I have to come up with some idea. In other words, if I got all these details and I'm told to try and figure out how to put together the details, I have to have some perspective of how I can tie together the details. And therefore, I become much more of a factor. Okay, so therefore, what happens is, by the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the Torah, he basically is telling us to start thinking through and coming up with broader ideas. Now, that's great. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to do this. Therefore, he's giving you a lot of ideas. The problem is once you start thinking, you can also challenge the law. Examples of the Kabbalistic problems that we've dealt with. Shabtai Tzvi, Jacob Frank, Martin Buber, right? All these people come up with, Kabbalistic ideas. I said Buber because it was for Hasidus, and so, he takes Hasidus incorrectly, but what happens is someone like Buber took these ideas and says, oh, this is the real religion, all these values, not the details of the law, right? But the point is once you start saying, think of the principles, and I'm coming up with all these principles, now I'm coming up with this idea where those principles can now put me in some type of challenge to the details of the law. And that's where I start getting into issues. In other words, once you deal with the details of law, you deal with detail law. Once God even tells you, think beyond the law, come up with general principles, once I come up with those general principles, I start to find, gee, wait a second, I'm not having problems with those details. Okay, and that's a tension. Okay, and then you might say, okay, so go back and figure out how the details work with the ideas and so forth and so forth. That's a challenge, but that involves further limud Torah and so forth and so forth. But once you're told to think in the process of coming up with concepts like Kodesh, like Yasher, like Tov, then you're already developing ideas. And those ideas already put you into your own realm of personal ethics. Okay, so we're going to go on from here. Where we're going to go from here is right now we're always doing it intellectually. Next thing we have to get into is personality and the emotions.